Hello, my friends. I think some of you know already that I'm really a fan of Shakespeare because he did so much for the English language and he also inspired so many people, including myself, in so many different ways. I love Shakespeare partly from that sort of linguistic point of view. I mean, the man invented a large number of words apart from anything else, but he also was the first man in England really to take the English language by the scruff of its neck and shake it together into a recognizable format that was pretty much used from then on. In Shakespeare's time in the 1500s, early 1600s, English was still sort of coming out of a period of evolution. It was only 100 years or so before Shakespeare that people were speaking a number of different languages in England. The the nobility and the royalty would probably have been speaking mainly French, uh, hangover from the Norman conquest at the end of the um, 11th century. Um, the academics, many would still be speaking Latin, and the ordinary English people would be speaking a kind of Old English, Anglo Saxon um, mixture with odd French and Latin words thrown in if they knew them at all. But it was all very much a melting pot and quite difficult to understand, even if you look at Chaucer writing 100 years or so before Shakespeare, or slightly more than that. Um, his his language is very beautiful. The words and his writing, his stories are lovely, but they're quite difficult for us to understand. English in those days, 100 years before Shakespeare, was much more difficult to really get a grip on. There were so many outside influences still at work, and Shakespeare was the man who really gave us something that the rest of us could work on after his lifetime. And of course, today, English is still evolving and new words are being added all the time, and it's a healthy sign for a language. I just want to try and give you an idea of the sort of thing Shakespeare was doing. I mean, if you take one of his most famous um, passages in Hamlet, um, great speech by Hamlet, that's a soliloquy, to be or not to be. I'll just read the beginning of it. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Today we can understand that um, that passage quite well. We know what he's saying, but before him, few people, I don't think anyone really, had written as clearly as that. And if you look at this in some detail, you'll see what I mean. The first line, to be or not to be, those are virtually all Old English words. Um, I'm not an academic linguist, but I think I'm fairly right in saying these things. Pure, simple, um, sort of Old English Anglo Saxon words, to be or not to be, all words of one syllable that a peasant would have known all those words. Then we come to the second line, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer. Straight away, nobler comes from the Latin nobilis and through to the French noble, and whether 'tis nobler in the mind. The mind is Old English, but suffer is again Latin and into French, souffrir. And then the third line, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Well, slings and arrows are Old English words, but outrageous is French, outrage, and fortune comes pretty much straight from the Latin fortuna, meaning the same thing. And the next line, to take arms against a sea of troubles. Arms is Old English, sea is Old Norse, and troubles is French, trouble. And then the last line, and by opposing end them. By opposing is from the Latin. End and them are Old English, I believe. So you can see just in 4 or 5 lines of Shakespeare what he's doing. He's combining, and he wasn't a terribly well-educated man himself. He had quite a good schooling, as children in Stratford-on-Avon probably did if they applied themselves in those days. But he wasn't a scholar. He didn't go to university or anything like that. Yet he was able to combine all these roots, all these threads of language, and produce a wonderful tapestry, a finished article. And not only that, along the way, he invented a lot of words himself. In Hamlet, for example, he invented words such as rant, a wonderful word. You know, Hamlet does a lot of ranting, walking about, sort of shouting and making statements. Another word, illume, to lighten, in other words, which comes very much from the French. Suspire, to breathe, to perhaps breathe quietly. That comes from the Latin and through the French as well. And swagger, that's a fine word. I think that must have sort of slightly Germanic roots, I think. But you know, what an amazing thing to have done, not just to have sort of even helped in the birth pangs of a wonderful worldwide language to such an extent, but to have contributed with words that, to all evidence, have never been seen, certainly never been seen in print before. And, you know, what an achievement to leave behind a whole country with a language that is from then on sort of very easy to use and to develop. What a great and amazing man Shakespeare was. I just my admiration is boundless. Thanks for listening today.